You can know everything there is to know about whatever you're selling, right? You can be really, really great at the closing table, but ultimately you'll be leaving most of your money on the table if you don't have a strong follow-up system.
Welcome back to the Business Behind Your Business podcast. I'm your host, Paul Sweeney. And look, it's confession time for me because I'm going to talk today with our esteemed guest about a topic that, being completely honest, I am really bad at. It's one of my weaknesses. Is probably the thing that I am least equipped to talk to you about, and that's why we've brought in our expert today. And look, I'm not alone. I think a lot of business owners struggle with this concept. And I think it's one of those things that we really need to address. We really need to have this conversation because it's costing you business, it's costing you sales, it's costing you cash flow. So, look, what is that problem? What's the confession? Look, it's about that conversation you have once you've got a customer in front of you. That conversation, that follow up. You've got the lead coming through your sales system, your marketing system. But that conversation, that's where things fall apart for a lot of business owners. So, look, I'm not going to try and answer that question because, as I said, it's my weakness. But I do have Jacob Hicks on the line, and he's going to be sharing with us how we actually overcome some of those obstacles that we have as business owners about this selling process. So, Jacob, welcome to the microphone.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Because, like, look, you've got your own podcast, which we're really excited about. We love having other podcasters on the show. So, the Purpose Driven Progress podcast.
Yes.
Got that correct? Yeah. But look, your background, sales and entrepreneurial systems. Can you just share a little bit more about where you've come from?
Yeah. So I'm gonna just give you the the quick elevator pitch. So I grew up in a small town in Iowa, which for anybody listening that may not know, that's right in the smack dab middle of the U.S. I grew up in a town of about 5,000, so very very small town. My dad was in sales for about 25 years when I was growing up. He was an insurance salesman for a really long time, and that's really kind of where I first caught the sales bug, as it were. But I didn't really explore that any until I got into college. So I was probably, I don't know, 20, 21 ish. I was in school, and something I've always looked for when I was looking for a job is I want something that will obviously help me pay my bills, but something that will also allow me to learn and grow and find, better information to just help me better myself. And when I was first getting into sales, it was suit sales. I was in retail. And as anybody that can has been in retail can tell you, it can be pretty rough going sometimes. You have, really, really great people coming in. You have some really, really interesting people and some people that, well, they maybe have had a really, really bad day and you get to find out about it. But it was a trial by fire. I mean, I worked my way up from, entry level salesperson all the way up to running the store that I originally started at, which was super fun because I got to take it from a nearly $250,000 deficit all the way back into the black, which I super enjoyed. But since then, I've really tried a lot of different things, including, real estate. Most recently, I was an outside salesperson for a couple of companies selling eyeglass frames and then eyeglass lens design. So I've tried, a little bit of everything in my time.
Mm. So a bit of a diverse background there in terms of sales. So because a lot of the time we hear somebody will talk about a subject, say, okay, and we're talking about sales here, and one of the responses I see, and it's a very closed-minded, closed approach to it, and say, well, hang on, well, you're coming from this industry, so how do you know about selling in my industry? But one of the great things is you've got experience selling in a lot of different industries, and
Mm.
you're also working with a lot of different entrepreneurs with different businesses at the moment as well.
Yes. Yeah. So, it's not as the truth is, at least in my opinion, I think that there are a lot of really strong pillars in sales. You have to be able to know your product. You have to, be reasonably good in conversation. You have to be able to handle objections. Some of those things are going to be true regardless of what industry you're actually in. When it comes down to it, the only real differences, at least in my experience, is going to be the product knowledge that you can have around it, and then your passion for it. I think that's really, really key and foundational in my opinion, because if, at least for me, it's really hard for me to sell something if I don't believe in it.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah. Look. Most business owners, they've got their own business. They've started with the passion. They're passionate about their product, but they still
Yep.
fall over when it comes to sales. So, look, I'm going to just say, look, how can you help us get over this problem that we have with talking to potential customers?
So, there's a few different things. So, the first one that I run into, particularly on the entrepreneurial side, very often is that people feel like they are bugging somebody, meaning that, maybe I meet you, Paul, at some networking event. We hit it off. We, exchange contact information. I want to, follow up with you. So maybe we grab a coffee, but we don't really talk about, purchasing or buying or anything like that. And then I'm like, we leave the conversation. Maybe it's a great relationship, but as far as the business stuff goes, I'm not really sure what's going on. So as long as you are coming from a place of like genuine concern and trying to serve the other person, I think that's really kind of first and key. And as long as you are coming from a place of value, particularly on the follow up side, I think this is absolutely key. And when I say coming from value, I mean, what information do you, Paul, as my potential prospect, my potential client, my potential customer, need to know in order to buy? And I mean, me as the salesperson, I'm the expert, right? I mean, nobody in the entrepreneurial side, nobody knows their business better than they do. So if you understand your business at that high of a level, then providing that kind of value, that kind of information, that kind of expertise to your potential client should be hopefully fairly simple and fairly straightforward, as long as you are always looking for it. Finding those things like a good example that I've got for you. I was working with a young entrepreneur who had just started a marketing firm, and he was, I mean, very similar to what you were just saying. Like they, started the business. They want the business to do the business, right? Like they want to be like this guy wanted to be a marketer. He wanted to be somebody that helps you with social media stuff and puts together, client portfolios and that kind of stuff. And what he didn't think about until we started to discuss it was like, okay, so if I'm a potential client of yours, what are the things that I need to know in order to for it to make sense for us to work together? And usually you can come up with like some lists, like what are the top like three things that somebody needs to know in order for it to make sense to do business together. And as long as you're coming from that place of value, I mean, things are looking up.
Mm. And look, you mentioned understanding what the questions your potential customer has. And
Hmm.
one of the problems I see, and I've had this said to me a number of times, is that often as the business owner, when we're trying to make a sale, we're pitching at our level of knowledge,
Yes.
but our customer is often coming from a different level of knowledge, and we've sort of got this disconnect between where
Hmm.
we're what the point we're talking at and the questions that they're asking.
Yes. Yeah. So the thing that I always, always, always recommend to folks, and this is true whether it be in sales, whether it be in your entrepreneurial business, whether it be just in meeting somebody, out at a restaurant, whatever it might be, if you, I think the strongest strategy you can have is coming from curiosity, meaning that you're not asking questions, just asking questions, but really trying to get to know the person. And generally speaking, when it comes to sales, usually we have to discover four different problems in order to make a sale. In order to get to those four problems, generally speaking, again, broad strokes here, we have to ask at least 12 questions to get to those four problems. So as long as you are continuing to ask questions and really digging in and saying, because a lot of the times like our clients, I mean, this is pretty common in sales. Like our clients can have like these misconceptions on what they think that they need when they actually need something else entirely, and that's up to us to figure that out. So coming from curiosity, asking questions in a very genuine and open way will actually help you close a lot more business.
Mm. Yeah, because I think really, yeah, one of the issues I see is that we have a product as a business owner, we've got a product or a service that we want to sell,
Yep.
and we become so fixed on that product or that service and how it's going to benefit that customer, but we're ignoring the actual needs and questions the customer has.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think one of the most powerful things that we can say as salespeople, as entrepreneurs, is I don't think that this makes sense for you as a potential prospect, right? And like being that's a very genuine place to come from. And honestly, I mean, a lot of times, especially when we're first getting started in a business, we want to get as much business as we can, right? Like maybe we quit our jobs. This is all we've got. Like we got to figure out how to keep the lights on. And I get that kind of desperation, but we need to be able to take a step back and make sure that we are actually serving our customers to the best of our ability. And during those coming from curiosity questions and that discovery call, that discovery discussion that we're having, if we are talking to them in such a way that says like, "Hey, listen, I don't know that this makes sense for you because of X, Y, and Z," that's I mean, that's going to win you business over the long term because you are again serving your clients and potential clients over, I mean, anything else really.
Mm. So you're positioning yourself that you're actually looking after their long term benefit. You're not positioning yourself as you're just got to get that initial sale from them. You're actually looking at
Yeah.
their real, what are their real
Yeah.
needs, and building that relationship.
Yeah, because I think there's kind of two mindsets when it comes to like closing sales and just sales in general. Like there's the short term and the long term, right? And the short term is like, hey, at the end of the quarter, I've got to hit such and such number in order to make my money or whatever. And like sure, like there's some urgency around that, right? But over the long term, because sales is a long term game, if you focus on only the short term, then ultimately you're going to miss business and you're going to burn bridges and you're going to upset people because you are putting them in a position that isn't ultimately serving them.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and look, we were talking before we started, before we pressed record, and you mentioned the phrase of selling without selling,
Yeah.
and I think the what you've been describing is really it's a building relationship, not trying to make a sale, but because you've built the relationship, the sales will then come.
Yeah. Well, and what I always tell folks, particularly when it comes around like selling and not selling, it's the follow up piece, right? Because I I'm a pretty firm believer that you can be the greatest at product knowledge. You can know everything there is to know about whatever you're selling, right? You can be really, really great at the closing table, but ultimately you'll be leaving most of your money on the table if you don't have a strong follow up system. And again, when it comes to strong follow up, that doesn't mean that you're calling somebody, every other day and saying like, "Hey, I'm still selling stuff. Do you want to buy stuff now? Do you want to buy stuff now?" I mean, we've all experienced salespeople like that, right? It's a thing. I don't know if it's true in Australia or not, but it's really true in the in the United States where we will get these telemarketer calls about our car's extended warranty, just harassing us all the time, and we everybody hates it, right? But if you are following up systemically, meaning that you have a system in place, meaning like what I always coach people on is at least to start is what I call my 10 by 10. Meaning that if I meet you, Paul, at a networking event and we hit it off, we get exchange contact information, and I think it makes sense for us maybe to potentially do business, then over 10 weeks, 2.5 months, I will reach out to you 10 different times. Now, that doesn't mean calling you every single week, but it could be calling you a couple of times over the course of that period, sending you some emailed information that I think will be beneficial to you. But again, just establishing yourself as the expert in your industry and coming from a place of value and knowing that when somebody comes in at the top of my sales funnel, that I actually have a system to make sure I'm following up with them consistently. And the consistent piece is really where people can fall away, whether it be sales and entrepreneurship or not. So I always suggest to people when it comes to your CRM in particular to find something that will support you, meaning that like I'm a big fan of automation. So when you meet somebody, you actually put them into your queue to make sure that they're getting either the emails or the calls or the text, whatever the case might be, automatically. So that actually takes that off of your plate. So it's again consistently getting done. It's not just some task that you're trying to find time to get done yet again.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So you mentioned automation in there. I want to go back a step, and you mentioned CRM, so customer relationship management system.
Yep.
Um, I think we are one of the issues I see a lot of business owners is that they don't see the value of investing in that kind of program.
Yeah, so that's usually kind of the first conversation that we that I have with folks because a lot of times unless you come from a sales background, I will say the acronym CRM, like what does that even mean? And people don't realize the value in it because they haven't experienced it for themselves. So they really have to establish the understanding that this will ultimately prove their success or not, I think, because I mean, you can be really, really great at what you're doing. And I mean, obviously the economic markets can go up and down and sometimes you'll start a business and it'll just, take off. And then, but you don't have your systems in place, which a CRM will give you a ton of those systems. If you don't have the systems in place, then ultimately when things maybe take a shift or you're not getting as many calls as often, then your business can ultimately take a downturn. I mean, a CRM, like the customer relationship manager, I think is absolutely critical, regardless of if you're a salesperson or if you're an entrepreneur or what business you are in, because you cannot, in my opinion, you cannot run a successful business over the long term by just meeting somebody and typing their name into it like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. Over the long term is not sustainable, and isn't a true system. It's just a document that I mean imagine that's the only place you have all of your clients or potential clients, and then like your computer crashes. I mean, what would you do? You would, I mean, your business could, I mean, tank almost immediately. So putting something into a CRM will allow you to do it, generally speaking, a few different things. It will give you like a one-stop shop so that as somebody comes, into your sales funnel, you actually have a place to put them. And then most of them, at least in my opinion, I think they should all have these, is the automations like I was talking about, where you meet somebody, you establish contact with them, you are taking notes, saying like, hey, I met Paul at such and such. We talked about this, and this. And then from the following Monday through, that 10 by 10 weeks, you are getting this email, and then I put a task on, my to-do list where I'm going to call you in, 3 or 4 weeks. So make sure you're actually putting systems that are supporting your business over the long term. And I think a CRM is an absolutely critical and crucial tool to doing that. And the fun thing with CRMs is that there's a million of them out there. So just Google CRM based on what it is that you are doing. And usually a lot of places will have very specific CRMs geared towards exactly what you're doing, whether that be salesperson, entrepreneur, nonprofit. Even there's a lot of nonprofit CRMs out there too. I mean, there's a lot of tools. So just do some googling and find things that will work for you.
Mm. And I think that the other thing there is that you're using the skills and expertise that somebody else has already done the work developing for you.
Yes.
You then don't have to learn those skills. Yes, you've got to learn how to pilot the CRM system, uh,
Yep.
and you've also got to put fuel into it. You've actually got to use it and enter those
Yes.
conversations, which I find a lot of guys get the bright new shiny CRM, plunk it on their computer, and that's it. They don't feed it. They don't put anything into it. And
Yes.
then they say, well, it's a waste of money. But if you don't use it, then it's not going to benefit. But we're talking about automating those. But you mentioned, scheduling in those tasks, those reminders. So, follow up phone calls, follow up meetings. What sort of way should we approach those kinds of follow up? Because a lot of people, particularly, look, I'm not a salesperson, and you mentioned the one that doesn't want to make the sale because they just want to get stuck into the work. But if you don't
Yeah.
feed the sales, so what kind of advice could you give somebody like me that is terrible at these follow up conversations?
So again, it all comes down to coming from value. So you don't want to call, if you're going to call somebody, if you're going to email them, you want to have a good reason for it. And it doesn't have to be that, hey, I've got this brand new product or this brand new service, or, I'm opening another store or whatever. Those can be great reasons to reach out to people, but it doesn't have to be nearly that big of a deal. So for example, I mean, it could just be as simple as, like, Paul, I just met you at a networking event. I'm just calling. I was like, hey, I know you're working on your business, and I would love to be a resource. Is it okay if I keep in touch with you? Yeah, of course. The wording, I think, is critical when it comes to some of these like more salesy conversations. One of my favorite like bits of verbiage when it comes to some of these things, particularly if it's okay if I stay in touch with you, is would it offend you? It's like, hey, Paul, we met the other day, so it was really, really great to chat with you. I'd love to hear what you were doing with your business. Would it offend you if I stayed in touch? More often than not, people are not going to be offended if you stay in touch. Now, if you're like harassing them, I mean, they might they might mind that. But if you're doing things in again a very service and a very customer first mentality, then that's going to get you win a ton of points. For the emailing piece of it, what I absolutely love is finding those little reasons to provide service to them. So, for example, one of my favorite ones when I was in real estate was, I mean, obviously, it gets really, really cold in the winter, and people have garden hoses, and you want to make sure that you don't have any water in your hose for that first freeze because that'll ruin your hose. So when it starts to get cold here in Iowa, which is usually September-ish, depending on the day of the week, we will kick out an email to all of our folks that we know and just say like, hey, make sure that unhook your hose and you get all the water out of it. It's just a value thing, and it keeps you as the professional person front of mind. But it really just being curious and trying to find reasons to come from value is going to get you a long ways.
Mm. So it's not. It seems to be that it's not that hard sales push. It's that actual act of service, providing an offer.
Yes.
Not so much providing an offer, but asking the question like, "Can I help you? Can I keep in touch? If
Yeah.
can I continue to be of service in the future?"
Yeah. 100%. Well, just saying like, like I want to support you in what you're doing. Obviously, you know what I do, and like there are paid versions of what I do out there. So just finding ways to stay in touch with people and provide value to them. Like I said, it'll go a really, 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 really long way.
Because often, though, I think as a buyer, I might not need your service now,
Yeah,
but when I do come to need that service, I'm going to think of the person that I enjoy the relationship with, that has the relationship. I'm actually not going to, I'm going to steer very clear away from the guy that's been pushing and ringing me every week and saying,
yep,
are you ready to buy? I'm actually going to gravitate to the person that's been working on that relationship, being available, but not that hard sell all the time.
yeah. Well, and I think you hit on some really critical thing when we're talking about follow up, right? Because follow up, I really, really firmly believe that if you don't have follow up, then regardless of how good you are at your product knowledge, or you're good at the business, or good at closing, or whatever, if you don't have follow up, then again, you're leaving most of your money on the table. I've read studies that show most business is won in the ninth through 12th follow up. Meaning that if you, again, like you were just saying, like most people may not need you right away, but they will probably need you eventually. So just making sure that you're staying in front of people, absolutely critical. And you're talking, like you mentioned, you don't want the guy that's been bugging you all the time. This is like one of my favorite kind of sales terms is what we call mind share, where again, most often we can usually name two name brands off the top of our head for toothpaste or cars or whatever. Then if we think for a second, then we can get three, four, five more. But usually we can name two right off the top of our heads. And when you have mind share, meaning that you're staying in front of somebody for that long term, then you're gaining that mind share. So when somebody thinks of a salesperson or a new car or a marketing firm or whatever it is that you are trying to move, then you're going to be one of the first two names that they think of, and they're going to reach out to you.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. And I guess the other thing there, we're talking about follow up here, is we tend to drop off that follow up activity if we don't get an immediate response. But
Yep.
look, you're saying a 10-week cycle, and I'm guessing in some cases it can be actually longer. But that regular, I guess, non pushy follow up.
Yeah. Well, so typically what I like, the kind of the general, my kind of general rule of thumb, and obviously these are very customizable systems that you can implement based on what you're doing and what makes sense for you. Usually, like I said, if I meet you at a networking event and I want to stay in touch with you, I want to warm that relationship up some more and make sure that you don't forget who I am. So over the course of the next 10 weeks, I will reach out to you those 10 times. Now, let's say over the course of those 10 weeks, I hear nothing but crickets. It's just nothing. Then, what usually I will do is usually I recommend folks implement some version of what we call a 36 touch, meaning that over the course of 12 months, that I will reach out to you in some form or fashion 36 individual times. Now, most of that obviously will be email. Just trying to divide, like, hey, I wrote this blog post about this thing you were talking about, like just like those kind of things. But implementing those kind of long term systems are again absolutely critical because I mean there's hundreds and tons of stories out there from sales folks that say like I never ever heard from this guy, and then all of a sudden he just reached out to me and said, hey, I'm ready to do business. And like that's kind of just the way things are. So implementing those systems, whether it be a 10 by 10 or a 7 by 7 into 36 touch or a 30 touch or whatever it kind of looks like it makes sense for you, again, is absolutely, I mean, I've said it a bunch already, but it's really the thing that will change your business and determine your success over the long term.
Mm. And look, that follow-up system, that 36 touch, you mentioned a lot of that is automated. Obviously, you tailor it towards that particular
Yeah.
um, prospect, but it's not a huge time-consuming process, particularly if you set up with your CRM system, with your automations,
Yep.
your reminders. It doesn't have to be a huge ordeal. It can just become one of those regular steps in your week
Yeah.
to follow up. And suddenly we've gone from this situation where just this whole concept of following up a prospect is one of those things that I'd rather go and see the dentist than follow up a sales call. To
Yeah.
it's suddenly a very easy process.
Yeah. I mean, and that's honestly, that's what I think is like really, really critical when we're talking about systems of any kind, because I believe that everybody has a system. It just depends on how intentional you are with it. Meaning that if you meet somebody at a networking event and then you call them for a coffee and then you don't hear from them and then you never call them again, that's your follow-up system. That means that you don't have much intentionality around it, which again is very, very common. But just setting up those systems so that it's automated as much as possible, meaning that allows you to do the business part of it. Again, it's the difference between working in your business and working on your business. And working on your business is setting up those systems in such a way that will support you and allow more and more leads to funnel down to the bottom of your sales funnel to make sure that you're closing business on a regular basis.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Look, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. I've learned heaps, and yeah, I'm actually excited. I've been making notes as we go of the steps I need to do in my sales process, my follow-up, because as I confessed at the beginning, it is not an area that I excel at. It's actually an area I really suck at. So
You're not alone. Not alone.
well, it's nice to know I'm not alone, but let's move out of that company, and I'm going to really act on some of the advice that Jacob's given us today. And look, it is a great way to approach it. It takes away a lot of that fear factor. And yeah, it's a combination there of automation and that human touch, which is what we're really about, because we do business with people. We like to automate, but at the end of the day, we're doing business with a person, and
Yes.
Yeah, it's up to us to sort of drive those relationships. So I've really enjoyed our conversation with Jacob. If you want to hear more conversations with Jacob, then I'd encourage you to subscribe to the Purpose Driven Progress podcast. I've got
Yep.
that name correct. But and also look, go to Jacob's website and check out some of his programs, some of his other coaching offerings that he has there. Because look, if you've got as much out of this conversation today as I have, then it's worthwhile checking out what else Jacob has to offer. And the website is www.jacobhickscoach.com. And look, if you've got a problem with typing like I sometimes do, don't worry. We'll put the links to Jacob's resources and the podcast in our show notes, which will also be on the businessbehindyourbusiness.com website. Encourage you to check those out. And also, please share this information in this interview with another business owner that needs this help, who might have a similar struggle to me. And if that's the case, then this is going to be an invaluable resource for them. Jacob, really appreciative of your time today and what you've shared with us. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I have our listeners have as well. I'm sure they will. And as I said, reach out to Jacob and have a look at what other offerings and the other ways that he can help you grow your business and improve your sales. So thank you again, Jacob.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Business Behind Your Business. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and valuable for your business journey. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with fellow business owners who could benefit, and send in your burning questions, because we love hearing from you. Missed any of our previous episodes or looking for additional resources to help grow your business? Head over to our website at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. There you'll find our full archive of past episodes, along with show notes, transcripts, and links to valuable resources mentioned in each episode. Your journey to business success continues at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and keep building the business of your dreams.